So, after yet another weekend of incredible college football, we need to talk about the newest AP poll because I feel like there are teams that have a very clear indication of where they are, but after that, it gets really murky, it gets really muddy, and that's what we need to talk about. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you agree with the AP poll going into week 3? Let me know where you disagree. Let me know what general intrigue you have. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content. You don't want to miss any of it. And if you enjoy that content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions are massive to content creators such as myself and getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. And also, before we jump into this, I'll be doing a live stream around 4 o'clock Central Time today. Stop by if you can. I'd love to have you. But with all that being said, let's just go ahead and name off the top 10 in this week's newest installment of the AP poll. At number 1, we have Alabama. At number 2, we have Georgia. 3, Oklahoma. 4, Oregon. 5, Iowa. 6, Clemson. 7, A&M. 8, Cincinnati. 9, Ohio State. 10, Penn State. And I want to start at the top because when I look at the top 3 teams in Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, that makes complete sense to me. Starting at Alabama, they hold a rank win. And no matter how you view Miami's still a team that's ranked. They were ranked within the top 15 when Alabama played them, and Alabama flat dismantled them. Now, the Crimson Tide came out a little flat this week. I grant you that. But at the end of the day, they still handled a Mercer team once they got everything gelling, once they got everything figured out. And Mercer last week put almost 800 yards of offense up on the board, something like 500 rush yards. Mercer has a really unique scheme that you don't encounter a lot, so when you do, it can really shake things up. But at the end of the day, the Alabama Crimson Tide first-team defense looks ferocious. That looks to be a really, really solid defensive unit, and the offense is a unit that we expect to experience some growing pains. But it's going to be very interesting to see how they rebound this week in practice, going into week 3 in which they have to go to the Swamp to take on Florida. So I do agree with Alabama at number 1. They've dismantled 2 teams back-to-back. Georgia at number 2. I do agree with this as well. Look, Georgia has the best win right now in college football, beating Clemson in a top 5 matchup. And then when we look at Georgia this week, in a week where we were wondering what Georgia's offense was going to look like because Clemson did such a great job defensively against the Dogs, Georgia went out there and lit it up in a week where their starting quarterback wasn't to go and they had to turn to their second string guy. So because of that, I do give Georgia the nod. You hold a top 5 win, and then when we were wondering, oh, is your offense going to get it together when you don't have JT Daniels and you go out there and do that, albeit against an opponent that you should have just taken to town, I do have to maintain you at that number 2. And much like Oklahoma at number 3, Oklahoma at number 3 makes a lot of sense to me moving up one spot because now that we've had some time, first and foremost, even though Oklahoma put themselves in a bad position against Tulane, even Sooners fans won't disagree with you there. Tulane was much better than I think most people give them credit for. Tulane spent their time in the offseason flawlessly preparing for Oklahoma. They knew how they wanted to attack, and they did a really good job of going out there and playing disciplined football and sticking to their game plan. Then Tulane goes out there and wallops a team this weekend, albeit not a very good team. But the interesting thing for Tulane is they play Ole Miss next week, a game I cannot wait to see. But for Oklahoma, you're put in a position where you didn't do yourself any favors in week 1 against a quality team now. We see that in Tulane. And then this weekend, you go out there and just absolutely dismantle a team that you should have beat, but you played with intensity for all 4 quarters. Your defense looked hungry. They looked fired up. Your offense was flowing. And because of that, I think Oklahoma is easily the number 3 team in the nation right now. And that's why I say your top 3 teams, I see that as being pretty easy to figure out right now. Now, 4 and 5 is really interesting to me. Oregon at 4, Iowa at 5, because I do agree that after the teams Bama, Georgia, OU, Oregon and Iowa absolutely come after. But I do think there's a logical and reasonable argument to put Iowa ahead of Oregon. Now, I'm not saying I do. At the end of the day, I do think Oregon going into Ohio State, going into the horseshoe, and handling business in the manner they did is really impressive, especially in a day where you didn't have 2 of your premier defensive players. But on the flip side, if I'm playing devil's advocate for Iowa, I'm sitting there saying, yeah, but we've beaten 2 ranked teams thus far in college football, in Indiana and then in Iowa State. All we've done is handle business thus far and look pretty darn good doing it, to which you really don't have much of an argument outside of Iowa State just doesn't look very good this year. But Indiana went out there this past weekend and handled business. So that Indiana win does look pretty good for Iowa, and because of that, I do believe there is a logical approach to putting Iowa at 4, Oregon at 5. However, I do give the nod to the Ducks going into the Horseshoe, beating Ohio State in a very hostile environment where 2 of your premier defensive players weren't there. Clemson at 6. This is where things get really interesting because you have a 1-loss Clemson team with teams that are undefeated behind them. The problem is Clemson lost to the number 2 team in the nation right now, and it is way too early for us to start talking about who has the best loss. But because of how things have shaken up, right now Clemson does hold the best loss in the nation, losing to Georgia, going out there this weekend and absolutely annihilating a team. It's going to be interesting to see how Clemson continues navigating through their season. Unfortunately for them, the ACC, which we usually know to be not very good, really doesn't look that good this year, so that's going to be something we have to watch, see how it continues, because I don't know that Clemson can make it back into the playoff, barring help from other teams to spread out their conferences. After that, A&M at 7. A&M is really interesting right now because A&M is a team that even though they're undefeated, they haven't looked the greatest. I understand that Kent State's score was a lot to a little, but that first half against Kent State was really, really sloppy play by A&M, ultimately getting it together in the second half. But then I look at this week against Colorado. Your quarterback goes down, your second-string guy comes in, and you squeak by Colorado in a good win with a great last play to secure the win. It's going to be interesting to see how they rebound, but at the end of the day, my biggest concern with A&M going into this year wasn't solely replacing Kellen Mond. My biggest concern with A&M was replacing Kellen Mond when you have to replace that offensive line that was sensational last year. I don't think people talk about A&M's offensive line last year enough. That unit was really, really solid. So A&M is a team that, we really need to watch continuing forward. Cincy at 8. Cincy's really well coached, and the interesting thing about Cincinnati is they have some games coming up that are going to be very telling as to how good this team is. This is a team that we could see easily climb up this rankings, and I wouldn't be mad if they were higher than they were because they're well coached, they're a talented team, and when we saw them against Georgia in the bowl game, they held their own. I get that was last year. Last year has no bearing on this year, 100%. But this is a veteran team, well coached, talented, and they're going to have some telling games coming up that I'm very interested in seeing that could vault them up this list. Now at 9 and 10, Ohio State at 9, Penn State at 10. I cannot in good conscience put Ohio State above Penn State right now. Penn State has 2 wins. Ohio State barely squeaked by Minnesota and then got beat by Oregon. Now, when I'm looking at the Minnesota win for Ohio State, at first I was even of the mindset of, okay, let's hold on a little bit and let's see how Minnesota is this year. This was a team last year in Minnesota that didn't have the greatest year, but when you really dive deep into the why, I think there was some reasons. First and foremost, Minnesota on average dealt with 20 players plus out per game due to COVID protocols. It's very hard to win when you have that going on, right? When you have that much absence within your league, it's next to impossible to win. So when I realized that about Minnesota and then I look, they're well coached, I thought maybe this team would rebound after the Ohio State loss. However, that does not seem to be the case because they barely squeaked by with the win this weekend. So that Minnesota win doesn't even look as good for Ohio State anymore, and that Ohio State defense is suspect. There's no other way to put it. That Ohio State defense is suspect, and they really don't even look to have much of an identity on offense. I know that sounds crazy when we look at how they're scoring because they are putting up numbers on offense, but it doesn't seem to happen with much consistency and much of an identity. So I, in good conscience, cannot put Ohio State above Penn State. And this is what I mean. This is why ultimately I want to hear from y'all, because we're going to talk about this more on the live stream tonight, but this list gets really murky outside of your top teams. Your top 3 teams are a very clear-cut 3 to me, in Bama, Georgia, OU. That's simple. 4 and 5 is any combination of Oregon, Iowa. Like I said, I can play devil's advocate to rank Iowa above Oregon, and I can do the same for Oregon above Iowa. But it's after that that things get really murky really quickly. And that's why I think we need to talk about it, and that's why this season, though young, is shaping up to be a really, really intriguing season. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.